Heyo, and welcome to Today Where I'm going to actually dive into a bit of a different topic today. Mark Carney very recently has came out saying that he's gonna go on a trip down to America and talk with Trump, and there's been a lot of talks around that, and so I'm just gonna add in my 10 cents, talk about it here, there, have a little bit of something, but a little bit of a special treat for you guys is that later in the video, I actually get to talk with an expert about this topic. Someone who has a brain, someone who is smart, uses their things to think real good, unlike me at times. Stay tuned for that. It'll be a treat, I promise. But before that all happens, because that will happen later in the video, sorry, but it's gonna be held off a little bit. Gonna get through this and then we'll get to that. But to start off, let us look at a video that has been shared from Brian Lilly, where it is Trump talking to press, talking to people, and talking about 51st state and his comments on that. Now, I've got my aging beaver. Let us dive right in.
Let's move on to Canada. You have long talked about making Canada the 51st state. There's obviously a new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, who you spoke to after his victory. He says that you didn't talk to him in that call about making Canada a 51st state.
No, he called me. He was very nice, and I congratulated him. He had a victory. It's a very close victory. It's there's no majority or anything, so that's going to make things a little bit difficult, I think, for him to run. But he nevertheless had a victory, and he's a very nice man, I think.
Do you plan to talk to him about making Canada a 51st state? He wants to
come and see me. He's going to come this week or next week.
So will you talk to him about making Canada a 51st state, annexing Canada?
I'll always talk about that. You know why? We subsidize Canada to the tune of $200 billion a year. We don't need their cars. In fact, we don't want their cars. We don't need their energy. We don't even want their energy. We have more than they do. We don't want their lumber. We have great lumber. All I have to do is free it up from the environmental lunatics. We don't need anything that they have. We're giving them. I asked Mr. Trudeau, who I call Governor Trudeau, I said, not Prime Minister, Governor. I said, Governor Trudeau, could I ask you one question? Why are we giving you $200 billion? Why are we subsidizing Canada? If Canada was a state, it wouldn't cost us. It would be great. It would be such a great, it would be a cherished state. And if you look at our map, if you look at the geography, I'm a real estate guy at heart. When I look down at that without that artificial line that was drawn with a ruler many years ago, it was just an artificial line, goes straight across. You don't even realize what a beautiful country it would be. It would be great. But I don't think the American public wants me to pay $200 billion a year to subsidize Canada. Again, remember this.
Maybe you guys realized, but I noticed a couple things. First of all, where is this $200 billion deficit coming from? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from military stuff? Is it coming from trade stuff? Is it coming from, I don't know. I'm not an economist. I don't know all these things, and I don't know where that is. But the other thing I'll make note of is how incessant the media is, how incessant they are about asking, do you want to talk about 51st state, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. They're just harping on that point. They're very, very pushy towards getting an answer on that, but he does answer it, and then he goes in to talk about the $200 billion deficit, and I don't know where that is. I don't know what it comes from. I don't know any of that. And so I decided to type it up. I said, hey, where's the $200 billion deficit coming from? And I'm just going to show you guys the things I have found. So from the CBC, they said Trump reiterates 51st state threat as Carney prepares for a critical White House meeting. And they more or less go over what I just stated. Or not what I stated, but what the video goes over, and they make note of his quote. I'll always talk about that. You know why? We subsidize Canada to the tune of $200 billion a year. Trump added, and, end quote. And then they go on to say, reiterating his false claim over the U.S. trade deficit with Canada. And this got me curious as to, like, what is the false claim? Is that false claim the $200 billion deficit? Because that would make a little bit of sense to me, because, as I stated, it's a bit confusing. Where is this $200 billion coming from? And so I clicked on the false claim thing, and this is where it took me. Fact-checking Donald Trump's claim about Canada in his global tariff speech. And description, Trump again falsely claims the US subsidizes Canada by nearly $200 billion a year. And then when you scroll down here, there's another link. Trump claims the trade deficit with Canada is a $200 billion subsidy. Experts disagree. And, I mean, just as a regular yokel person, I'm looking at this, I'm like, they're really milking this. They are, like, milking this cow dry. They're just continuously pulling on them udders, and they're just milking this story dry, because, like, now I gotta click on a third post to get to the really smart people, the experts. I gotta get to 3 different CBC articles to get to the bottom line of this whole entire thing. And the other thing I thought that was a little bit interesting is in the title, fact-checking Donald Trump's claim about Canada in his global tariff speech, and then the thing is, Trump again falsely claims the US subsidizes Canada by nearly $200 billion a year. I mean, the term falsely claimed, that is, a bit of an opinionated thing. It's an opinion. But then down here, they do a little excerpt from the link there, and it says, experts have previously told CBC News the size of the US trade deficit with Canada is largely a function of oil prices. If oil prices go down, the deficit shrinks, and vice versa. If oil prices rise, they also say trade deficits are not a form of subsidy. And I think this is a little bit interesting, because Trump says that they subsidize Canada by $200 billion a year, but if the experts are saying that this is not a form of a subsidy, then why would he be saying the word subsidy? It almost seems like a completely different argument. It seems like they're arguing against something that is completely shifting the narrative a bit. It seems like they're shifting the narrative into something that more aligns with what they're trying to argue against, because Trump says it is a subsidy, and yet here are the experts in economics saying that, they're just experts. We don't know what they're an expert in. They're just experts. They're saying it's not a subsidy, and yet Trump he's got a pretty big business. I think he knows what he's talking about when he says subsidy. So it's like, he says subsidy, the experts say no, it's not an actual subsidy. So, like, why is he using the word? It doesn't make sense. So, anywho, I was a little bit more confused, and so I dove into the excerpt here. And this is where I got to the heart of it, to where the experts are speaking, and they're talking in it, and they, titled, the bold letters is it really a subsidy? Now, before I go into that, the title of this is, Trump claims the trade deficit with Canada a $200 billion subsidy. Experts disagree. Economist argues US could be worse off if it had a surplus with Canada. And so, once again, as the other headline was, this is, the thing I noticed is it's a bit of an opinionated piece. It's not, the thing that isn't an opinionated piece is saying, Trump claims the trade deficit with Canada is a $200 billion subsidy. That's not really an opinionated piece. However, the opinionated piece is, experts disagree. I mean, who are the experts? Do we know them? Why are we, like, experts? What does that mean in terms of people? Do they have the wealth that shows for what it means to be an expert in something? Or are they just, is it like, are they a homeless person trying to tell someone how to become rich? We don't know who the experts is, they're just the experts. And the reason why I point that out is because when you get further down, I'm just going to read this out, okay? I'm going to read this out, and then I'm going to tell you guys what my problem is. Experts say that while the US has a trade deficit with Canada, i.e. we export more to them than they export to us, that relationship serves the US economy well and should not be viewed as a subsidy. And so I'm just gonna stop at that little thing there of this. I'm just gonna stop there real quick and realize experts say that while the US has a trade deficit with Canada, and I want to point that out. Because, I mean, actually, I'm going to point another thing out. They say that relationship serves the US economy well and should not be viewed as a subsidy. This is the problem with opinionated pieces, is that they're completely opinionated, and they don't actually have firm grounding in anything, and yet CBC has experts in. If they have experts, why are they making lofty claims that don't actually have any firm grounding? Just saying it should not be viewed as a subsidy doesn't mean it can't be viewed as a subsidy. Doesn't mean he isn't viewing it as a subsidy. And the other thing I'm pointing out is how they say, while the US has a trade deficit with Canada, we watched that video. We watched that video of him talking about the $200 billion subsidy. He doesn't say the words trade deficit. And now, while there are a lot of clips of him talking about the $200 billion deficit, and so maybe he does talk about trade deficit in specific, which, I mean, it would make sense he's talking about trade, you know, with the whole entire tariff situation going on, but it doesn't necessarily mean trade deficit. It could be military deficit. It could be NATO deficit. It could be a bunch of things that are all culminating into the term $200 billion deficit. I mean, I know a lot of people like to make fun of him, but like, he's a smart person. He knows what he's talking about. Maybe he's lying. There's a chance in that. However, when I'm reading something and they're just continuously giving us claims that don't actually have any claims, because they're saying it should not be viewed as a subsidy, doesn't mean that it isn't or can't be. It isn't really a strong claim. It is a claim that isn't firmly planted into the ground. It is like building a stack of cards. You know, you got all these pieces so perfectly put together, but one singular gust of wind and the whole entire thing goes to the ground. Doesn't actually have any firm planting in reality necessarily. But anywho, I'm not going to read the next little piece. I'm not going to read the whole entire thing because I'm going to nitpick, but I mean, this I think is an important part. Quote, I think that in Trump's mind, he sees trade as a zero-sum game. Moshe Lander, an economics professor at Concordia University, told CBC News. He's just hearing the word deficit, and that is the end of his math calculation. And here's the other thing. They say, quote, I think that in Trump's mind he sees trade as a zero-sum game, and then they go on to say he's just hearing the word deficit, and that is the end of his math calculation. These are two completely different claims. The first claim is that he sees trade as a zero-sum game, but then the other claim is saying he's just hearing the word deficit, and that's the end of the math calculation. Those are two different claims. Trade is one thing, and deficit is another. Deficit is something that can have an entire cacophony of different types of deficits that are all culminating into a $200 billion deficit. So, it's a little bit of a nothing claim. Because they said something here, and it doesn't line up with here, and yet they're just saying it as if it does line up. Now, the other thing I will point out is the term expert here. I have a real big problem with that word. And, I've said it many times before. I'll say it again. I have a lot of problems with the term expert nowadays being used because I don't think it actually means expert anymore like it used to. It's like other words that media corporations use a lot of times, but they don't mean anything nowadays. So the term expert just seems like a word to seem fancy and bourgeoisie and yada yada. And the thing that I'm pointing out that for is like Moshe Lander, an economics professor at Concordia University. Oh my goodness, the universities the universities, just point blank period. Wow, they have such brilliant minds over in the universities. You know, the one that they can't tell the difference between a binary. Those type of universities. Why would I trust his statement? He's a professor. And I don't know if you know this, they don't exactly have the reputation that they used to, because they used to have the reputation of knowing things, whereas nowadays they don't. And they have a clearly lacking membrane in their brain. So, like, why would I listen to him? Like, he's an expert, but is he really? Is he really? Does he have the money to prove he's an expert in economics? Because, I mean, if he knows things about economics, it should be really easy for him to make money. But, like, does he have it to show for it? I mean, is he a professor, so he should have money, but I don't know. Just a question. Now, I want to take this moment, because I'm bringing up the fact of how they talk about trade deficit when the video we just watched, he doesn't bring up the term trade deficit. He just talks about the $200 billion subsidy, which he doesn't specifically call out trade deficit. It's just $200 billion subsidy deficit. So I point that out because we look at the CBC article, and they go into trade deficit specifically, which is, once again, that's not necessarily what he was referring to. He could have been referring to a bunch of deficits all coming together to collectively equal that $200 billion deficit. He didn't really mention it, what he was talking about. It's all hypothesis at this rate. It's all assumption. It's all what we think it might be. But he didn't really actually claim what it is. And me personally, when Mark Carney goes to meet Donald Trump, I would like for Mark Carney to ask Trump what he means by the $200 billion deficit. Like, where is it coming from? How is he getting that figure? I would like him to really harp in on that figure. I would like to figure out that. But the reason why I am harping on the fact of this is all a hypothesis is because when you look across the news stations, like the Washington Post or CTV News, they talk about the same things. They all bring up the same thing. Is it a $100 billion or $200 billion trade deficit? Or is it a subsidy? It's all opinionated pieces that don't necessarily have firm grounding, but they all have boisterous titles like Trump's fantastical claim of a $200 billion subsidy to Canada, or CTV News, does the US really subsidize Canada like Trump says it does? It's all really boisterous titles that when you go into it, they seem like they have a lot of truth because they have the experts chiming in. But if Trump didn't actually claim it was a trade deficit necessarily, but rather just a $200 million subsidy deficit, which could be a cacophony of many different deficits, then they're just shifting the narrative to be something that they can then uphold with a bunch of truth claims, which, like, if you read the CBC news article like I did, a lot of it does make sense. It does actually make sense what they're saying, but the problem is that their headline, their boisterous claim that gets a lot of clicks, is the first claim. That is the bold texted thing that people will read, that many people will read and be like, oh, such terrible, and then move on. But when you get into it, they're all arguing for the title as if the title is what Trump said. they're shifting the narrative and then going with that to get a bunch of people to funnel in with the clicks and then stay with the truth, even though the truth is about something that never actually amounted to anything. It's just a bunch of truth claims to make people think that they're saying the truth. Anywho, that is all I wanted to say. Before getting into the call, which will actually be happening pretty soon. So, I hope you guys enjoy that. But I don't know. I just hope that when Mark Carney goes, he talks about this. I want him to ask, where is he getting these figures from? Because I would like to know. Maybe the articles are right. Maybe the CBC, CTV, maybe they're all right, and he was in fact referring to the trade deficit. In which case, I'll take back my qualms that I have about this. But I don't know. I'd just like to figure out what he was actually referring to, rather than a bunch of hypotheses or ideas or guessing about this whole entire thing. But without further ado, let us now dive in. Now, just before we get into the Discord call with this expert that I have found, I am going to be letting you guys know that he did message me, and he said he doesn't want to include his face or his voice, so he's going to be using a bit of a voice changer. It'll be, obvious, but, I just wanted to make that known to you guys as to what's all happening here. But anyway, let's get into this call. Good day, sir. Thank you for joining me here.
Thank you for seeking me.
So, to dive right in, I just want to get your opinion on Trump and him talking about the $200 billion subsidy that they grant us. What do you think he was referring to when he said that?
To keep it simple, I don't know what he was referring to in specific. Sure, I could extrapolate to a multitude of different things, but he didn't really explain where the $200 billion came from. And so, anything I say would just be hypothesis.
Huh. Really? Seeing as I do a bunch of news coverage, I've seen many news stations that have been talking as if he was referring to trade deficits, and they've even brought in some experts to corroborate that message.
Can you give me any examples of such?
Sure I can, like CTV, CBC, The Washington Post. Kind of surprised that you haven't seen them.
I didn't say that I didn't see them. I'm just asking you for your examples, as a trend that I've been seeing is that a lot of statements that Trump has made tend to be inferred from the stations to mean this thing or that, when Trump hasn't actually said what he was referring to. And the problem of such is that when the future plays out, those inferences tend to be wrong, or just a complete lie in my expert opinion. Now, I will say that they do tend to have their facts straight. The only problem is that the stations shift the argument away from what was originally made into something that isn't relevant, which is why I say that in this situation, they are intentionally being deceitful to the people.
Oh. So, would you actually say that your opinion is that the news stations shift the narrative into something that isn't necessarily truthful?
In my opinion, yes. They purposefully switch the narrative as they know how to entangle their viewers and then fill their minds with a bunch of useful nothing. Or, to put it more simply for you...
No, I actually understand what you're saying perfectly.
Please do not interrupt me again. But anyways, they change the narrative in the beginning to get the reader hooked into the story with an intense title, and then fill their brain with a bunch of truthful statements to make their original claim seem true to the unknowing mind, furthering people's belief in their news, as they seem to know better than the common person does, forgetting the fact that the original claim, the headliner, was completely a false misdirection. So it is just a bunch of truthful statements made to hold up a lie. And it unfortunately works very well to the uninformed person.
Okay, I apologize for interrupting. Thank you for sharing your opinion, though, on this matter, as, to be honest, I now have a lot of things to think about, and I did, in fact, learn something. So, it is essentially like, building a house on sand.
Right.
Where you got all the materials to form a proper structure, like the truthful stuff, but they're all being used to stand atop sand, which, as we all know, is not a strong base. And that essentially is how the news stations are getting away with such misleading statements. As it's like the people who are seeing a properly standing house without noticing that it's built on sand. Is that also right?
Pretty much. But I think it is more simply put from Matthew 7:26, where it talks about the kind of person who doesn't build their house upon rock, but listens to lies and builds the house upon sand, and it eventually crumbles down.
Yeah, that's an excellent way of putting it. Though I can't help but ask now, when are you thinking that the news stations will supposedly crumble?
In my opinion, I truthfully don't know.
Well, okay then. I guess that is all I can ask for there, but anyway, thank you for joining us today and being our expert on this matter. I really appreciate you giving us your time for this, but that should just be enough for the day.
It's my pleasure to teach you and your audience about this stuff.
Alrighty, I hope you have a good one.
And you as well. Later.
Wow. Okay. That was an interesting call. That was an interesting, conversation. I did not expect us to agree on... Because, honestly, he was saying a lot of the things I was saying, which is not something I exactly expected, to say the least, but I don't know exactly what to say. I mean, said a little bit of what I was already thinking of, or saying, is how it's all built upon truth. Like the deceit is built upon a bunch of truth to uphold it and make it seem real or proper or something that people should be listening to. But I don't know, it's just weird to hear an expert speak about that, and how they're speaking about that. It actually kind of makes me wonder, how do they find their experts to corroborate their story? How did they find their experts? What is the vetting process for how that goes by? But I don't know. Anywho, tell me what you guys are thinking down below from all that. And hit the subscribe, like button, all those things. Tell me what you're thinking down below. But until next video, which I hope you're there, you better be there. But until it, I hope that you have a good one.